We wanted to try and make a difference with our entry. It was on the River Sword, and it was a flood risk site. And we thought, well, the common solution which everybody would approach would be to build a flood defence, hold the water out, and stick a high density development on the top. And we thought, what would happen if you allowed water to come in? How would your environment change? That's a very dynamic, adaptable it would need to be. Where does your car go? How do you go to the toilets? Does this building move? So we developed this scheme. It didn't win, but it caught the attention of the building research establishment, and they asked us to do a talk. And when we were at the talk, that was attended by people from Holland, and then they asked us to speak at the World Water Forum in Mexico. And before we knew it, in a very short time, we were being introduced as flood experts. I don't profess to do that. But it's led us on a long journey over the last 10 years, and now I'm the architectural advisor at number 10. So when there's a flood at the Cobra, we get invited along to...
I think you're moving. I think you're moving.
But yeah, we get to check the speeches before any of the ministers make an announcement. So in the course of that period, there's been a major flood event somewhere in the world every single year. And this is just a very, very brief summary. When we do this talk in America, we're not able to mention climate change. But one thing is for certain, the weather patterns are changing and the frequency of flooding is becoming more prevalent. These are my photographs from New Orleans after Katrina. We were invited to go there to give a European perspective. And what was interesting was the academics and engineers were involved. It's a very, very good film that one should watch, which is called The Big Uneasy, whereby anybody that raised the issue that these are all designed at the moment to a 1 in 200 year flood event, which is a very, very low level of protection. It's actually a federal offence to design anything to a higher level of performance. So I don't know whether they were worried that if they opened, the floodgates of this, that elsewhere in the country they would have to then open up potential lawsuits to design to a high level of protection, but 1 in 200 is really not very good. So our approach is, rather than holding water out, is at some point in time you need water to come or allow water into the built environment. You can do that in a predetermined way. We have a lot of scientific data. We kind of know how water or flooding behaves. We can determine where it goes, and through using different materials or different strategies, we can predict how that water will behave. So the first piece of research that we won in a competitive build was making space for water for DEFRA. So that was a fundamental shift in policy. In Holland it's called making room for the river, but it was how will our built environments change if we allow water within them. And we also went back to government and said we also want to calculate that to be designed to zero carbon. So there's going to be a little video that runs here, and I'll just talk you through some of the key principles. So we understand that we're building more, pension funds push that along. We know that there's environmental change. We know that people are not in touch with Mother Nature, so they need to live with water. So all of those principles come together within the LIFE project, and long-term initiatives for flood risk environments. This is a drawing that appeared in the Guardian magazine or newspaper, and essentially we're saying deculvert our rivers, create green infrastructure swales, use civic space, like Tesco's car parks, just a sea of tarmac. Those could be more intelligently planned. School playing fields. And what we said here is your typical village green, in the event of a flood, can become village blue. And actually to look at gardens as shared space, so you can actually allow water to be absorbed within those as well. We'll come on to look at some of the flood resilient houses, but essentially there's a vulnerability matrix in terms of planning. So if you're in flood zones 1 or 2, you may be allowed to build housing. In flood zone 3, you should really have water compatible uses. We're saying in certain scenarios there's an overlap with those because, for example, the strategy that we looked at here in Lewis, some of the key strategic areas were in flood zone 3. So do we build in the countryside, or do we acknowledge that those are, it's better for people to have live where their jobs are, but to design to a different level of protection? I've got a feeling this will. Let's see if we can move on. Talking about just hopping back to the toilets and sanitation, this book here, which is by Jessica Lamont, we were a small bit part from the Cities in Flood. We provided all the illustrations, but this is the World Bank's most downloadable free publication. And this is examining how to build mega cities where the politicians are corrupt, money disappears, how people are building skyscrapers with nothing to plug the sanitation into. So there's some very good lessons in there. So we can't take credit for that, but it's a very, very good publication. And over the last 10 years, these are all the different elements that we've been involved in. A combination of those, because they're quite hefty bits of text. We've just literally lifted all the executive summaries and compiled those in Architecture, which is a book that both Robert and I published together on behalf of the Royal Institute of British Architects. And it looks at what you need to do at a political level all the way down to a very micro scale, because what we found in this journey that we've been on over the last 10 years as a practice is that you can't build an amphibious house if you've got a policy in place, and then but the politicians don't know what they're designing for, and maybe in the questions and answers I'll talk you through some of the things that we're lobbying for in changes in building regulations. So what you've just got here is a quick sample of some of the pilot schemes that we've been involved in. In the first scenario, you can build a house on stilts, and that's great, it elevates it out of the floodplain. But the Environment Agency will not let you build solid beneath it, so you have to have a thing called like-for-like flood compensation. But the downside of a stilted house is when you're above sort of 9 or 10 steps, it's actually quite a slog to go up those steps. In the winter it becomes quite icy. And then equally, which is what happened in New Orleans afterwards, people were building houses 2.5, 3 meters up in the air, and that beautiful veranda, the porch, was actually becoming a balcony. And there's a whole area in the Low 90 district where there's sort of like cities in the sky, and they've lost that urban quality or connection with the urban realm. So we say, after sort of about 1.5 meters, really you should consider another solution. The other issue in that as well is that it actually puts stress on the structure. So then you can allow water to come in to the property. This is a luxurious house in the Midland line in Richmond upon Thames. But this is a grade 2 listed building. This appeared on Country File about 6 months ago, and it's designed so because I've been asked to cut my talk short. There was a little film of a fire service filling it with water with a hose pipe, and literally you can drain that property in less than half an hour and then start to dry it out. But it has non-return valves on the toilet system, the electric's all coming from above. It's designed to anticipate abuse by water. So things like the typical build, you put your plasterboard or drywall in vertically, you put it in horizontally, because it's actually good to take the plasterboard out at a lower level. So also thinking from an economic and from a sustainability perspective. If you're very close to the river, you can actually build floating houses. So we have the Chichester, which was on TV recently for Mark and his wife. And then over in Holland, we've got some micro floating units, so this is about the size of a caravan. This is the one that we're most famous for, the amphibious house over in Marlow. And then this one we'll show you about briefly, which is for a rather famous tech entrepreneur. I'm not a big fan of the Daily Mail, but I did like this drawing. So, the house that we're most known for is the amphibious house. It's located in flood zone 3, so exactly like what we're located here in Lewis. An amphibious house is a house that sits on the ground, and when the site floods through Archimedes' principle, it becomes buoyant. So it's hydrologically linked to the river, but actually not on the river, so it's about 10 meters behind. And this building is designed to raise about 2.5 meters. This is the can flow test. And I think you'll see in a moment, you'll start to see it rises, and it's quite a hefty piece of kit. It's connected through its services through elephant connections, and the toilet or the sanitary system is housed within a biodigester with a special anchoring system, which means that it doesn't become buoyant in the flood. Now this was a building which doesn't exist in terms of English planning policy. So we had to convince the Environment Agency, and that's why the work that we did with the LIFE project through our colleagues in New Orleans and Holland were able to show sort of proof of evidence that, also proof of concept that this, proof of concept that this would actually work. So we talked about our work at different scales. We've been involved in, so this is Iber, Orangeburg 1, which is where there's large floated communities. We were actually employed in the scheme as the landscape architect, and we were brought in to save 20% of the infrastructure costs. And they'd had engineers working on this for 3 or 4 years. And we just said, well, why don't we move the starting point and the end point, so it's 20% shorter. And we saved them just under £100 million. These are our schemes around the UK at the moment. We're working on Liverpool, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. At a strategic level, we have huge bodies of water in the UK which we are underutilising. The Royal Albert Dock itself, to give you a sense of scale, is 5 times the height of, 5 times the size of Trafalgar Square. Trafalgar Square has Nelson's column in it, which is 60 metres tall, and at the moment they're putting little narrowboats in, so there's a very odd, there's a bit of a conflict between scale and appropriateness. So for this scheme, we started to look at this as urban realm. So you've got Liverpool 1 here, but this is organised around a series of spaces that, so this is sort of the shop window, the eateries, we've got an active Royal Navy element here. They've now built a second Echo Arena, and one of the things we encouraged the full council was not to put it this way, which the developers were hoping to do because that would have killed off the marina. So we started to look at also the planning process of how to build and activate this wonderful network of canals, because within the UK at the moment they are effectively being treated as sort of riverboat cruises. So we have had a few choice words with the Canal and Rivers Trust to try or to encourage them to reconsider that these used to be the arteries and transporting materials up and down the country, and we need to really activate these again. So you can start to see some of the fun things which are going on there, from giant sort of puppet shows, Red Bull involved, and hopefully in this area here we'll start to see one of the first large-scale UK floating communities. We were brought in by the Dutch to look at one of their Room for the River projects, and let me just show you the next slide. From World War II history, the next bridge along here is the Bridge Too Far in Arnhem. We're on the threshold between Holland and Germany, and we're very lucky in the UK in some ways. In that with water, we have just issues of water crossing boundaries between counties, but in Europe, if we've got a flood defence here and there's a major flood, we push that water next door into Germany. So Holland at the moment, for many, many years, they've been building dikes, and they're starting to consider something which is called managed realignment, which means you concede that Mother Nature will win, and you've got to give back space. And we were brought in to give some thought to what will happen with the river canal, or the channel. It's about £300 million excavation. The water will come here at a phenomenal rate, so you have to deal with the velocity. And we've treated these as outdoor rooms, so each space, the water is treated in a different way to give us a different sense of how that behaves. So these are what we call the river rooms, and this is the sort of main front of house, all the marinas, this is the sort of camping, so this is the vault. But on this island, will be left, this is shown, we're going to do a short version, but this will slowly be inundated with water, so there's only a small sliver of land left. This allows us to create an area where we've got all different house types, so floating, amphibious, flood resilient and traditional. And this will be a wonderful exemplar of how those different technologies can work to create and deal with flooding. So this is as it was, and this is under construction. So the amphibious houses will go here. There's a tower going on the corner. This will be the campsites and festival areas. And one of the things which we really worked hard with the Dutch authorities, they seem to be slightly different than in England. We have English heritage, which won't let you touch anything. And then we knocked down a dike here, which was 1600 years old. We've actually also was here. We've actually managed to keep the dike alignment, and that's where the position of the bridge will be. So again, remembering your history as well within the context of flood mitigation. Further things that we're currently working on. So we're the master planners for Dover, and as part of that regeneration strategy, we're looking at creating a very large scale floating lido. So we're trying to create a destination within itself. And we'll talk on a little bit later about floating infrastructure. But the benefit with that is that if this is unsuccessful in this location, we can just take it somewhere else. And there's a real benefit with using floating aquitecture. Because, for example, if you were to do an Olympics, which are very incredibly costly, you could have infrastructure which is shipped around the globe, again, to a slightly more sustainable approach. The blue drempel, so that's the Dutch word for the thresholds. And this scheme is probably similar to some of the scenarios that you have in here in Lewis. So we are 1 kilometre away from Shakespeare's home, and this was a site right on the approach into Stratford-upon-Avon. And the key issues that we have to deal with here is the Environment Agency wants to have floor level all the habitat very quickly. This was a site that had a flatted 1960s development on it with many, many bed spaces on the ground floor. The Environment Agency, when we look at a flood risk site, will take a climate prediction plus a freeboard plus an allowance for that being a flaw in the calculation, which means that a bedroom space or a main living area needs to be quite substantial height from the floor. Now, currently in UK policy and plans is that your ridge heights and finished floor levels need to align with the existing properties next door. So on one hand, you've got the Environment Agency saying raise the land, on the other hand, you've got planners and local parish ward councillors saying not any taller. Equally, if you raise the development, you have overlooking issues into the properties. So along Shipson Road, we have, this is lower than this gets higher. This road gently rises to almost 1.8 metres in the middle. All of these have to have level thresholds, so for DDA compliance, so wheelchair, pushchair, everybody has to come in at a level threshold. All of these buildings are on stilts, so flood flow can come all the way through. At the rear of the property we have swales, and we have an elevated walkway that takes you into the raised tramway. And this development is designed so all of this is almost invisible, so it feels like a normal suburban site. This is that cluster of houses at the rear of the property. So in a low level flood, we're using the swales, which is taking water from Shipston Road and pushing it to the back. And in the extreme flood, all of the houses and primary living spaces are out of the floodplain. And this is the sort of strategy we need to adopt if we are to reactivate brownfield sites in our historic towns and cities. This is a section through, and as I say, it looks quite familiar, but you can start to see some of the louvers subtly introduced here, and this wall is perforate, and so just a couple of steps up onto these properties, but all of the properties at the back all have level thresholds. So this is the tramway properties, and as I say, can absorb quite a substantial amount of water. In terms of informing policy, so currently I'm part of the RBA policy team. As a consequence of that, it's a City Hall, but also an advisor at number 10. At the moment, the route that I'm trying to champion is that currently building regs is one size fits all. There's a very low level of flood resilience. What we've asked in terms of a change is that if you're in flood zone 2 or 3, then you would be obliged to build in resilience measures. And then in parallel with that, we're also trying to get the insurance sector, so for example, if you have health insurance, if you're a non-smoker, your premium goes down. We're trying to get it so that there is a reward or an incentive so that if you do put resilience measures within your property, then you actually see a reduction in your premium. So this is early doors in terms of that. from that exercise. One of the things which the RBA are championing at the moment is the innovation licence. Now, the innovation licence is suggesting that currently we've reached a bit of an impasse in terms of innovation here in the UK. The innovation licence would allow each authority to grant a certain fixed number of these in each of the boroughs. And if you were a developer, and this could be applied to education or health sector, it allows you to be slightly liberated from current planning policy. So you would say, look, I would like to build a flood resilient community. We will demonstrate that it's fit for purpose. It's in conflict with certain regulations at the moment, but we will demonstrate how we overcome that technically, and therefore by building it and testing it in a real flood event, we'll show it's fit for purpose. So that would be audited by an independent consultants. They would then say that's fine. Now, that would allow the developer, so for example, on a normal scheme, there would be certain tax credits and things you have to pay. That would absolve them from that, but they're taking the risk on this development by investing in a slightly different way. Now, if after they built it, it doesn't work, then that would be rescinded and they've got 2 years to restore it to current building regs. And we think that this will really bring innovation in the built environment. So this is a more extreme version of that, and as you know, going back to the English country house and sanitation, people like the Rothschilds were involved in first fire compartmentation, toilets, first lifts. This is a very well-known, wealthy individual, but by paying for this pilot scheme, this is a building, so the video just doesn't quite work, but it actually can put down its legs. It's flood-proof and it's hurricane-proof. And essentially it's like Thunderbird 3. It can lift itself out of the water and it can move. And this is under construction at the moment. And I know it's a very high-end slick version, but you know, disc brakes came from Formula One and now they're in your Prius. So we do have to sort of get help from some entrepreneurs from time to time. So go back to my original slides and floating homes. We designed and built the UK's first building reg compliant floating home in Chichester. But going back to the canal system in London, we identified that you could so currently a one-bed flat in London is a phenomenal amount of money, and it's really difficult for young people to get on the property ladder. These can be built for less than £200,000 a go in a 2-bedroom. There's also space at least for 5,000 of these immediately within London without affecting where the canal boats will be and the riverboat navigation. But as I say, I mean this one, the new ideas for housing for London by the NLA, but we say we're up against the Canal and Rivers Trust at the moment that feel that this is against what their core brand is about. In the future, so very quickly, we've now teamed up with Water Studio across the water. I'll go through this very quickly. So, you know, at one end of the scale, we're developing very fun things. So these are our little tide floats. More seriously, we're looking at activating a big area of the Royal Docks in central London. And then the role of the urbanist, the architect, we've been asked to look at cities by one of the sort of the largest sort of tech companies in terms of how sort of a quality of life issue. They want to have places where they can have their campuses, they want to have places where they can attract the brightest. But normal cities, the infrastructure is fixed, it's incredibly static. Equally, these companies are interested in moving things and assets around the world. So we're coming in to taking a little bit of an exercise in terms of optimization, in terms of building floating communities that enable our existing cities to expand very quickly and to grow. So let's say, I've done that in an incredibly short period of time. I know there's a lot to absorb, and I'm sure that you probably do have a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Do we have questions quickly before the artist ceremony begins?
I have a good question, if I may. I was very interested in what you were talking earlier about the waterways. I understand the politics with the cruising industry, but how have you factored in climate change modelling into all of this? Because here in rural Sussex, when I look at the waterways we have, I'm aware that the Ouse used to be a river that people would barge stuff up. I mean, not many people realise that the viaduct at Balcombe was built from bricks fired in Belgium and barged across the channel and sent up the rivers. It used to be a useful commercial. What's going to happen with our waterways, in short? Is climate change going to mean that we have less water in our rivers and less water, therefore, in our canals? So in actual fact, those resources are going to be battling to stay as they are? Or is climate change going to mean more cloudbursts, more water, rising sea levels are going to be flowing back in from the ocean? Which way is it going to work, and where is that going to leave the buildings that you're proposing to build?
Okay, so there's not a one-size-fits-all answer for that. In some areas, it all depends which country, first of all, are we talking in the UK?
I'm relevant to South East England, shall we say.
Okay.
Very selfishly.
Okay, in some areas of the UK along the coast, we're going to have some significant what's called managed realignment. And there are going to be some large communities, and I'm not able to say where they are serious scenario testing to move 100,000 people elsewhere. We have to just say, or concede, that Mother Nature will prevail. So the question then is, which ones of those cities will they be, or communities?
You've given us a guessing game, haven't you?
Terribly sorry. But ultimately, those people will be relocated to safer areas. And I think a lot of that is determined by topography. So we've got to work with Mother Nature first of all. In terms of the river network, there's still capacity there for a long period of time. If you look at central London, for example, they did a study called T2100, which was looking at the Thames Barrier. Is it fit for purpose? Now, the good thing about the Thames Barrier is that the engineers really did over-design it. So it will keep London dry for the next 200 years. So London's okay. Elsewhere in the UK, let's pick Southampton. That's sufficiently far enough away. That has no formal sea defences. So they're currently looking at building huge swathes of development along the riverfront, which I think is challenging, and I think one needs to make sure that the lower ground floors are designed to be resilient. Is this recorded? Okay. I'm going to move to Paris. Paris we're looking at a site on the outskirts of Paris which is upstream from some of the major assets, Arc de Triomphe, the Eiffel Tower, and it's a big industrial estate. And we're talking huge. And what we're looking there is, one, taking away the old industry, but two, putting back mixed use, so shops, offices, commercial. But we're looking at, it's almost like a Barbican model, whereby there'll be ground level activity, but raised streets and cities in the sky, so that given different flood scenarios, we anticipate that some of these areas will be inundated with water, but there'll be sufficient warning times. So for example, if you were to own a shop, the shop will be on the ground floor, and if you can imagine that this was a mezzanine floor, you'll be able to then take your goods to the higher level. And a lot of the things that we're looking at as well is the role of technology. Your mobile phone is your window into the world now. Should be able to give you early flood warnings, should be able to, that's my wife calling to me. 5 minutes. No, so that effectively your way out in terms of where you evacuate to. And interestingly, when we were asked to go to a think tank about the developing world in terms of flood resilience and safety, actually, we said the best solution was that actually every mobile phone, for an extra £1.50, you can make them waterproof. And that will save more lives. For example, sanitation, you need to go to the loo within the first 5 hours of a flood event. Where do you escape to? When is food coming? So things like the mobile phone, they are really good assets. I've sort of done a bit of a around the houses.
I didn't realise it opened Pandora's box when I asked you the question.
Indeed.
But the rivers will be viable, usable. The
I
canals
think
will be
what we
usable.
have. what we have to look.
Even if we dry out,
You know, I think what we've got to do is, in terms of an urban strategy, is we do need to make more space for water. So in certain areas, we have to have managed realigners. We have to take properties out of the floodplain. In other areas, so for example, if we've got a very dense city, you might decide, okay, we're going to densify this area, but then we push the water to the outside. So you've got the new super sewer in London pushing water out. That's a big overflow pipe. In other areas, we can do a hybrid, where through the built environment, you can have different solutions. So say, and then the role of technology, which we're starting to investigate with some of these big tech firms, will make the way in which we respond to flooding a little bit more immediate. And actually, keeping people informed is a big solution, or a big part of that problem. Okay.
All right, thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you so much, Richard. That was quite a fantastic whistle-stop journey through so many possibilities about floating and other water-related buildings.